Welcome back to yet another Atomic Geekdom interview. We are so happy to be here. Obviously, if you're watching it, you can see who's here. But if you're just listening, it is me, Matt, and I am here with Jenny and our favorite interviewee, Jonathan Maberry, whose new book, Cave 13, the latest installment in the Joe Ledger series, and Rogue Team International specifically, is coming out. Well, as we record this, it's coming out on Tuesday. So by the time you hear this and or see it, you can get that book. In fact, I actually just got the notification in the mail that my pre-order from Amazon went into the mail like yesterday. So I should have it tomorrow when the mail comes. So welcome back, Jonathan.
I'm delighted to be back. You guys are a lot
Oh.
of fun. So hi.
Oh, thank you. We're delighted to have you. So I want to jump right in because I had something right off the bat that about this novel that I was super interested in. Just for well, we'll probably talk a little bit about spoilers in this interview. So if you haven't read the book, go ahead and stop. But I'm not going to do a big spoiler right off the bat because the subject matter of this book is a little bit based around the Dead Sea Scrolls, which I found actually very interesting because in the past, Joe and the various teams he's been a part of have kind of gone after things that are more I guess more based in pop culture, zombies and UFOs and cryptids, quote unquote, genetically modified organisms. But the Dead Sea Scrolls are a little bit underground, a little bit more based in like theology and history and stuff like that. What kind of sparked the idea to use this particular device as a whole Joe Ledger kickoff event?
Well, I mean, I've been toying with pushing Joe to the edges of supernatural stuff off and on for years.
Mhm.
But the Dead Sea Scrolls, I've always been fascinated with archaeology and history to begin with. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, for those who don't know, there have been 12 caves in the Qumran area of Jordan that have these ancient scrolls in clay pots and so on. They were found by accident and so on. One of the caves had a thing called the Copper Scroll, which listed out all the places where treasure could be found, but there's no key to it. And
Oh.
descriptions only matter. Would be like if I told somebody right now, well, go down a block to where that guy is standing by that building, reading a paper, and then make a right. Well, that reference is very timely. Would end right now. In fact, I
Uh-huh.
walk, and the references were like that. They were all like very immediate. So there's nobody ever found it. And I always wondered what treasures they were that were hidden. And they are constantly looking for more caves. So I invented a 13th cave, Cave 13, in which not only are more scrolls there, but they find scrolls that are of a different kind. Instead of being specifically attached to pre-Christian Judaism, because all the Dead Sea Scrolls were all Old Testament stuff.
Mhm.
I also in my and some Roman stuff. I also included in my cave stuff from ancient Egypt, where it turns out that if you've ever read the original stories or if you saw the movie The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, there was a fight between the court magicians for the Pharaoh and Moses and his brother Aaron. Like they threw
Yes.
their staves on the ground, they became serpents, and Aaron threw Moses' staff on the ground, it became a serpent and swallowed the others, and I think that was really cool. So the Bible actually has a description of a magical battle. It's like Voldemort and Dumbledore going at it. So
Mhm.
I decided to take that idea and say, well, what if there was some truth to the way magic was used in ancient times? And these scrolls explain it. And of course, that would be a potential fantastic weapon for someone, especially a group that did not have enough money or enough people to put a big army in the field against the West, against us,
Mhm.
nations. What if they could use magic? So
Yeah.
that's kind of a seed that's in there, and it actually will overflow into the next Ledger book too, which will be called Burn to Shine, which I'll be starting to write in about 2 weeks.
Yeah, that phrase came back in Cave 13, and I texted Jenny as soon as I read it, and I was like, oh no, not this again. This is bad. This is very, very bad for
Yeah.
everybody involved.
If you read the end of the book where that reference is in, you'll realize that the character that Joe shot,
Mhm.
he shot in the body. You don't kill zombies
Yes.
that way.
Yeah.
Just
Oh,
saying,
yeah.
But that's for the next book, and I'll be starting to write that the day after. Well, I think the 5th of September. I'll be starting that as soon as I
Gonna
finish.
say I just read this morning you posted about how you were hooking into an IV of coffee and putting on relevant movie soundtracks to
Yes.
hammer out the end of the manuscript of the third Kagan book.
Yep.
So,
And in fact, I
uh,
literally just stopped writing at this before this. I'm already up to 2,291 words for today, and it's only
oh
11
wow.
o'clock my time, so I'm going to have a good day.
I have a question going back to the magic, because what like drew me into Ledger from the get-go, back to Patient Zero, Dragon Factory, all of that, was everything had a basis in science. And it, they're zombies, but they're not really zombies. They're they're the infected or what have you want to,
Yeah, disease.
want it.
Yeah.
The last two books, especially since Rogue Team has started, there seems to be more of that supernatural element where the team is still kind of like saying, like, we can explain this, they're doing this with science, they're doing this with computers, but they don't ever, from my perspective, ever resolve the magic part. Kind of going back to Relentless, the whole I have Joe's hair, now Joe has the darkness type feeling. I had that similar feeling with this, of the cobras and weird hallucinations and such. Is that going forward going to be kind of more present? And how are you tying that in with all the science behind it?
Well, I haven't come down in any of the books and said specifically that magic is supernatural. Magic could be a type of science that we haven't learned to quantify yet, and that's something I've explored in a lot of my books. But also, there has been a supernatural being in the Ledger book since the third one, since King of Plagues, Nicodemus.
Yep.
He's not human. He is an immortal trickster spirit. So clearly, magic does exist in some form. Now, that, as a scientist friend of mine says, that may be explained by the mathematics of the universe if we ever understand that math. That magic could be, and this, by the way, dates back to my grandmother, my wonderful, creepy, weird grandmother. She's basically an 80-some-year-old version of Luna Lovegood. She believed in everything.
Yeah.
That was my first exposure, not only to world mythology and folklore, but also to science, because even though she believed in the supernatural, she made me read the science to see if there was an explanation that would explain it. Partly because some things turned out not to be supernatural, and like, for example, real quick, sudden infant death syndrome was believed for years to be caused by vampires that would come and suck the life breath out of a child. And then we understood that sudden infant death syndrome is an actual scientific thing. It's a medical thing.
Right.
So she wanted to not believe in things that can completely be proved by magic, but at the same time, she was hoping that magic would prove science, or that science would prove magic, that it would prove that magic existed, and that it could be measured and could be used. She hoped some future generation would, magic would simply be another category taught at Caltech.
Yeah.
And
well, it's that old quote, right? Oh, sorry. It's that old quote, right? Any sufficiently advanced technology would appear indistinguishable from magic. Where if we went back to the Middle Ages with our cell phone and started playing them a movie, they would be like, how does that box have little moving human beings in it? You know?
It's the basis for the Prime Directive in Star Trek. They even played that in one of the Star Trek movies. I forget which one, where they accidentally exposed the Enterprise to a primitive culture, and then we see them worshiping that shape. We know that happened with an airplane back in the 20s or something. At some point, there was
cargo cults.
Yeah, cargo cults. Yeah. So we know that magic and science and understanding and belief are not only tied in together, but we don't have a box big enough to fit them all in. kind of believe they will. So it's a roundabout way of saying that in the next Ledger book, in actually the next two, because it's Burn to Shine, and then the next one is The Alchemist, which is the origin story of Mr. Church,
Nice.
which I finally have been bullied into doing. That
Thank
will
you, because that leads my next thing is like going back to the magic stuff. There's a line towards the beginning of the book when he's like interrogating, and it goes, he thought he saw red flames flickering behind the man's tinted glass, and I'm like, what is that? Like, it made me so, there's that weird in between where I'm so excited, so frustrated, and also terrified. Like, I want to know more about church. And I think that this book definitely, between Relentless and Cave 13, he's starting to kind of be pulled out a little bit more. And going, I mean, we're jumping ahead I'm going to jump ahead to later in the story. One of the things that I thought was a cool comparison between Relentless and Cave 13 is sort of the emotional aspect of Mr. Church. Because in Relentless, he's talking about how close he is to Aunt Sally. And even though she and her nursing home is close to Cersei, he has more ties to Sally. And then in this one, the moment the drug's in the air, he's like, Aunt Sally, you need to take your medicine, and just that, bringing it together, it humanizes him, where most of the story, he's the flickering flames behind the glass.
Yeah, and he is actually human. I mean, Mr. Church is human. He's just very old. We got to the point where 250 people have now guessed who he is based on the clues I left. Rage has all the best clues. Okay. And then my editor said, look, we got to tell this story. We got to tell his origin. So I had no plans of ever telling that story, by the way. I wanted to leave it vague, but he wanted the story told, and it will be told. So, but good. Also about Aunt Sally, there's an anthology coming up in November called Joe Ledger Unbreakable. And it's one where I invited my friends in the industry to write Joe Ledger stories. One of them is written by Ray Porter, my audiobook reader.
Oh, awesome. Who
knows a little bit more about the Ledger's background than anyone else. He wrote a story about Mr. Church going to visit Aunt Sally in a nursing home. And it is a heartbreaker of a story. And it ties in a little bit to what Church's delusion was when he was exposed to the bioweapon in this book. And also, when you read this book, don't forget that the bioweapon, the hallucinogenic bioweapon, has existed. I mean, they were flashbacks to before this story starts.
Yep.
Just bear that in mind. Makes you wonder what is real and what is not, is what it boils down to.
Well, it has made me wonder, and I think you were talking about pushing the edges of mysticism and science and everything. There's a scene in the book that and maybe this is my own, Jenny and I were talking about it, maybe it's both of us, maybe our own perspectives, but there's cobras. There's a scene with cobras. You alluded to cobras from Aaron and everybody fighting, but also there's a scene where they just appear, and this book is about hallucinogens, and yet these people die by being bitten by cobras that appear and disappear, and
captured on film or captured on camera.
Did we both miss something, not knowing where they came from and went, or
no?
What's the okay?
Let's just say there's a lot going on in this book.
Yes,
a lot of different things going on in the book. Not everything is explainable, based on what we give you in this book.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, more things. I mean, the next book follows up on the Cobra storyline. Okay. Burn to Shine takes that and runs with it. I mean, there was even a couple of chapters that set that up. So it's rare that I set up a next book in a book, but I kind of set up the next two books after this.
Boy, did you just go right into something else that we were talking about. It seems like since Rogue Team International began, the Joe Ledger series is a little more serialized than it was before. Obviously, the other books, when it was the original run of the series, they had stuff in them that came from the ones before them, but not in a way that because obviously Joe had several love interests that spanned different books, and characters carried over, but story didn't carry over much. However, it seems like the Rogue Team International years are setting each other up as they go along. Was that something you always intended to happen to the series, or did you get to the end of like Relentless and go, oh, this needs to keep going and I need to keep exploring this?
Now, I once I decided I was going to close down the DMS and start Rogue Team International, I planned out the next 5 books as basically one extended story.
Okay.
Each one has its own arc that is resolved within each book.
Yes.
But it's a little closer to the structure of, say, Harry Potter, where there is still a through line that pulls you into the next book and the next. That 5-book storyline will end with Alchemist, and after that, the books will be more like the original DMS series, where each one will be standalone.
Okay.
That's my long plan. And I've already got, like I said, the next 2 sold and scheduled to write. So, and they're all plotted out.
And
Awesome.
going into that train of thought too, the original DMS stories, about every other one would end with a conclusion and they can have beers and they're waiting for their next mission. Every one of the RTIs end in absolute heartbreak. And there's no like, we're going to sit on the beach, we're going to relax for a few minutes before we have to jump back in. This book in particular, usually it's Joe or just the team itself, just the Rogue Team that is affected, but it's branching back out more. So at the end of this book, again, spoilers if anybody's made it this far in the interview without reading it, church, toys, you name it, they all have so much weight, and that weight parallels with what happened in Rage and then continued into Relentless. Even Top's storyline, I think this is one of the bigger like dive into Top's character, because Top was so against, like, he was there when the darkness took Joe, and you can see that lingering in this one. And when you get to the big battles at the end of Cave 13, it all comes full circle right back to that with the hallucinogens and stuff. And when you're plotting these, are you, how do I say this politely? Are you striving to torture us with like losing people we love, and then just the brutal ways that they're lost? It's not just like simple, he died. It is heart-wrenching circumstances.
Well, it's not that I intend to torture anyone, and I don't like gratuitous deaths where a character is killed just for shock value. I've never liked that, whether it's in Game of Thrones or Walking Dead, when you can tell that they needed something to prop up an episode and they decided to kill someone. I don't do that. Any character's exit is planned many books in advance. Sometimes I change that. With Grace Cortland, I intended to kill her off in Patient Zero, because originally Patient Zero was going to be a one and done, just a single novel, no series. And after it was bought, the editor wanted to know what the next few books were going to be about. So I decided to, in the final draft of it, keep Grace alive. But other characters, they come and go, and war is like that. People die in war. If you ever watched one of the very best war shows ever done is Band of Brothers, very few of the characters we fell in love with and bonded in the first episodes are in the last one. We see what attrition does, and we see how big a hole that leaves in the world of each character. It would be ridiculous for Joe's team to have gotten this far without cost. And also, Joe is now known by the enemies. Of course, they would go after him and his family. In one book, the bad guys went after a lot of members of different families. They went after Bug's mother. Bad guys will do that. And that's one of the dangers of staying on the battlefield for a long time, is you get to be a known quantity, and therefore that makes you and people around you vulnerable. It's funny, this is the basis for the secret identity the superheroes have. They want to hide their face so that nobody goes after their family.
Right.
So
You're leading me straight into it, because one of my favorite lines in this book is like, "Who the hell are you?" "I'm Joe fucking Ledger, asshole." And I was like, that's my line. That's the line that I've been waiting for. That's Batman right there. It's awesome. And like, I seriously put the book down and I was just like, yes, that's what I wanted to see.
I do love Joe quite a lot.
He's got such an eloquent way of like
Yeah.
telling things.
Yep.
But going back to that, it's like, I like that you hinted that people are gonna die. Because before reading this, I spent the whole time going, he's gonna kill Toys. And I have come to love Toys. Toys is my favorite character in the book. Every scene that he is. So Cave 13 is an absolute gem for me, with the whole Wild Hunt crew, everything about it. And him, he's no longer the guy seeking redemption in the background. He's part of the fight again. And I love that. But I spent the entire book waiting for Toys to die. And again, spoiler, he doesn't, which I'm happy about. But who you decided to take, I think, hit me harder than of what I was expecting it to be Toys. Especially Andrea. Like, that one hurt. And I didn't expect that one to hurt so much, because he hasn't been a part of the team for that long. But the whole bonding with him and Remy throughout the book, I fell in love with them, much like I like Top with Bunny. They became a great cohesive group. And then, nope.
Interesting thing about Remy, by the way, before I address that, I had a couple reach out to me. They're both huge Joe Ledger fans, and their son had died shortly after birth, and his name was Remy. And they asked if I could just mention a character's name. So I decided to make him an ongoing character. He will not be killed off. Remy will be with Rogue Team International for the rest of the series. That one touched me quite a bit.
Yeah.
As far as Andrea goes, I loved his character, and I wanted to do more with him. But I had actually planned from the first time I introduced him for him to go out in this book, and how. And same as one of the other characters who died that I really liked, because I introduced the other character who dies back in a short story called Deep Dark, I think it might have been. Or I'm not sure if it was Deep Dark, or it was an early story. And he was kind of a fun, cool character who was not able to be a soldier anymore. And his predecessor also died in the end of Extinction Machine, I think, or in the middle of Extinction Machine. It's dangerous to be that close to Joe and his team. You know, bullets are flying, hearts break. But it is strange, because I grieve with these characters. I feel, the characters become people that I know, and I still have pangs about Grace Courtland. I have pangs about Gus Dietrich. I liked the characters. If I didn't like them, I wouldn't write them the way I write them. There's a lot of emotionality that goes into writing these books, and deciding who lives and who dies, and how they live and how they die and why. It has to make sense to the story. The way what happens to Church in the end of, when he gets hit with a bioweapon, was something I had been planning for a while, and it was tragic. It almost happened, by the way, in the end of Rage, when he was on the stage with the various heads of state. He was going to, get hit by rage and do horrible things, but I felt that it was not the time for that yet, so I moved it back a couple of books.
Well, that's what's terrifying going into Burn to Shine, is the emotional damage that has been done to everybody. And you expect it just because of their line of work. But how do you approach going forward? Because Church seems invincible. Like, from the get-go, he is the mysterious man that you can't touch. And even if you follow through into, the Rotten Ruin and Broken Land stories, he always has that persona of like Joe. He can take care of things. He might be beaten, he's got scars, but he can take care of things. How do you plan on going forward with, like, in the books, you know, there's a little bit of hurt because of like his relationship with Cersei. And you see those little cracks in the veneer, but this one has to be an absolute peel back. It's just the scenes in the hospital towards the end of the book are rough. How do you plan on moving forward and still keeping that idea of his invincible like
Well,
sense?
here's the thing about Church. I mean, you know, I've already hinted that he is very old, you know.
Yes.
Every time I've seen a story about somebody who is immortal, not millions of years old, but hundreds of years old, you know, like Dracula and so on, they're supposed to be the sum total of all those years of acquiring knowledge and experience, and yet they're easily foiled by a Van Helsing, somebody who is as smart as someone can be within one lifetime. And it doesn't make sense to me. That much experience would lead to that a greater insight, a greater sense of protection, a greater sense of manipulation of the people around him, so that it explains how he has managed not only to survive all this time, but to become a person of such power as he is. It's how I imagine an immortal who is not sitting around going, "Oh, poor me, I'm going to live forever and be beautiful," like, you know, Lestat and so on. This is what an immortal does when they have found a sense of purpose, and they can look at the centuries as the school that will help them fight the war that they're called to fight. And the ending of Cave 13 with Mr. Church sets up The Alchemist. It will explain why we will eventually get to his origin story and how that story will impact his relationship with Cersei. Because now he has grandkids too. Cersei and Rudy have kids. He has a legacy he has to consider. He knows he's made mistakes. I mean, like anyone who is absolutely obsessed with a certain thing, and the war is his obsession. It's been at the cost of his family. He has not been a good father in his family. He was not a good husband. Not that he was cheating or anything. He just was always at work. He was always on the job, and there is a cost to him about that. Now we know that he has actually been having sessions with Rudy, going back to Dragon Factory, I think. So we're going to see some of those too, and yeah, we're going to really peel back the layers, and it will not weaken the character. I think it will humanize him more, so that we can see the passion, the drive, the cost, and the heroism of doing what he's doing over this span of time.
He reminds me, and what you're talking about reminds me a little bit of perhaps like the only time in the James Bond series where Bond himself got to be a little bit human. And it's, of course, when James Bond got married and then his wife was taken away from him,
On Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah, on Her Majesty's Secret Service. And then that didn't carry forward for super long, but it was there and just a little bit. And also it also happened in one of the Timothy Dalton films. I can't remember if it was Living Daylights or License to Kill.
Yeah.
Where Timothy Dalton goes kind of on a revenge spree versus being on just, versus just being on a mission. Like it something touches him deeply because, James Bond otherwise is kind of just a mission machine, kind of like Church is kind of the war is, kind of.
They tried that with Daniel Craig too. Quantum of Solace was his revenge movie, but unfortunately it was during one of the writer strikes, and the script was not what it could have been. I would love to see what the script would have been had the writer been able to make the change. Anytime a movie's being filmed, you've got the director and the writer and the actors working all the time. Often the head writer is on or near the set. I would love to have known what that story could have been, because it felt like their attempt to do on Her Majesty's Secret Service. They wanted to do that thing with that level of cost. And then with the subsequent movies, his heart is somewhat broken. It explains his ongoing deepening cynicism. Unfortunately, the Daniel Craig era ended on the stupidest movie since Roger Moore. By the way, I'm not a Roger Moore fan. Loved him in The Saint, hated him in James Bond. Yeah. But No Time to Die was just a stupid movie.
Yes.
and there are at least 14 ways Bond could have escaped those missiles. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to bring about you mentioned one story about how Remy came to be named after a real person in a very touching way. But in this book, the villain is sort of a real life hero. He sort of won the real life Jason. How do you pronounce his last name? I'm sorry.
Ate a lot.
Ate a lot. I thought it was Adeloti, but ate a lot. Okay. The real Jason ate a lot. You had a charity auction, correct? And he won by, he gave a good amount to charity. I want to acknowledge his contribution to the charity, and I want you to talk just a little bit about him.
And Jason and I have become friends since then too. We were acquaintances before that, but we became friends since that. Mm-hmm. And I had fun turning him into one of my more satisfying villains.
Yes.
And I really liked it, and it's funny because Ray Porter, who's narrated the book, he thinks this is his favorite book of the Joe Ledger series, and he loves that villain. He thinks that villain is wonderful. But yeah, Jason, it was the second time somebody at the Superstars writing seminars, we do these auctions so that writers who can't afford to go to a seminar to learn from the top in the business, like Brandon Sanderson and Jim Butcher and Kevin Anderson and so on, we're all part of the faculty of that. We want them to be able to go there so they can have the career they want to have. The year before was Maya Cleave, who became what she wanted to be in one of the Ledger books, and she wanted to die a heroic and messy death. And so I put her in Relentless, and she wound up joining Havoc Team. And so she's the one that I forget what her combat call sign is, but Maya Cleave was in that whole book, and she was also an auction winner. And there are a lot of auction winners. A lot of the characters are named after real people. The character Lizzie Corbett, who is Elizabeth Corbett, who's been in a couple short stories and was one of the people telling Joe about the Dead Sea Scrolls, is based on Elizabeth Corbett, who was a librarian married to a writer.
Oh, okay.
Good friend and just a generous, good-hearted person out there, always doing the right thing for the good people. And I started using her. So a lot of the characters are based on real people. Even Brick Anderson was based on one of the guys from my martial arts school when I was a young man, who had been badly wounded in Vietnam, lost a limb, but he would still come into the dojo and teach. And so I like putting real people into the stories for a couple of reasons. One, to celebrate those people, whether they're making a donation for charity or have just been a good person or a good influence in my life or someone else's life. But also because if I have a real person I can base the character on, I know more about their personality traits, the way they speak, the way they react, and so on. And allows me to bring a greater level of realism to the way the character appears on the page.
Okay. And I did like Jason as a villain. He was a fantastic villain. And there was and I was also very proud of myself. I had to pat myself on the back this time. I'm usually a mark for any kind. I don't normally predict things or see things coming, but somewhere early in this book, I got a notion in my head. I was like, I think I know what's about to happen later on. And it turns out it did. And I was like, for that character, that's even more. Now he's even more interesting than he was before. This is great. So
I'm the total opposite from you though, Matt. Like I didn't catch it until maybe 2 pages before. And I was like, wait, are they going to do this? Is this happening? But and correct me if I'm wrong, this has to be one of the most characters in any of the Ledger books. There are so many people at play in this story that trying to keep the villains like organized, and then also the heroes, and Joe Team and additional characters that were brought in as well. I was like bouncing all over. So when that surprise happens, it took me off guard.
Cool. I'm glad it surprised you. I usually have about a 70-30 split of people who don't see the ending before like we're in that scene, and 30% who do, but not always, not everybody sees it exactly as it's going to be. And most people enjoy it when they find it anyway, even if they're following all the clues. And there are clues. There's always clues. A lot of times it's easier to find in a reread. But I do like laying the clues. And this is one of the reasons that I plot my novels rather than just write by the seat of my pants, because I'm laying clues, little tiny ones here and there, little misdirections, little insights. And it's, it's fun to do. And with a large cast of characters, I love ensemble stories. I love TV shows and movies with ensemble casts. That's one of the reasons I love the early Marvel films. Everybody gets their moment, and I like doing that. I'm writing the third Kagan novel now, and it has the largest cast of characters of any book I've written.
Oh, cool.
Because in the first and second book, when I was writing the second book, I had the intention of writing a series of Kagan novels. The publisher decided, based on market studies, that trilogies sell best. So she wanted me to turn the Kagan novels into a trilogy. And that meant I have a lot of plot lines, a lot of characters that would have to be resolved in the third book. So I had to scrap my outline of the third book completely and rebuild it in a way that is not only workable to those characters, but fun. Because I got to have fun. And
of course.
The ending of that one's not going to be what readers are expecting either. It's leading up to this big, huge field battle between the Hockeyians and everyone else, and that will be in there. But that's there's more to it than that, and I do have fun with my weird plotting.
It's funny that the publisher found that, of course, they probably have more market access to more market routes than I do. I'm about to quote one book lover podcast I listen to where seems like listeners of this podcast love ongoing series. Shout out to Reading Glasses podcast, and it's a great podcast. And everybody that is always like, I'm into this series, and I'm looking for another ongoing series that is kind of like this series over here.
Well, it depends on the genre. Trilogies, because of Tolkien. Trilogy. I mean, whenever you used to be, if you said the trilogy, everybody knew who you were talking about.
Sure.
Tolkien. So that kind of set a standard for fantasy, for epic fantasy. And like Joe Abercrombie right now, who's one of the top epic fantasy writers, writes in 3-book series. Even though if you read them, they do continue the story on. They're plotted as an ongoing series, but he has a resolution for 3 books and then another 3 books and another 3 books. And that's what I'll be doing with Kagan. I already have the plot for the next trilogy. I haven't sold it yet because I already have 7 books sold that I haven't yet written. That's going to take me 2 years to do. So in the process, we'll be pitching the next Kagan series, which will deal with the Serpent Men.
I want to just comment. You said something there that you said I have 7 books to write in 2 years. It took me most of this year to write one. So
my first novel took me 3.5 years. I mean,
okay.
So Dragon in Winter, the third Kagan book, is my 49th novel. I kind of have the idea of how to write a novel down efficiently. Gotcha. And like, for example, I have my recent. This is the first book come out this year, Dragon or Son of the Poison Rose.
Yep.
It's the longest novel I have ever written. It's 200 and some thousand words. 3 months. I wrote that. The book that comes out a week from Tuesday, a week from Tuesday, Sleeper's War, that I co-wrote with Weston Oakes, again, doorstop, and that's 750 some pages, 3 months. So I kind of have it down now that I can do a novel in 3 months. So I'm working on a novel, on my calendar. I have one novel every 3 months, allowing within that 3 months time for short stories, editing Weird Tales magazine, editing anthologies, and occasionally going to the beach with my dog.
Nice. And this is since you just brought up the Sleeper's War, this is a question that I'm always interested in, and it has to do with co-authoring. I find co-authoring a very interesting process. And I know, for example, like The Talisman, where Stephen King and Peter Straub would hand it off, and one of them would write a chunk, and then another one would write the next chunk and send it back. How was the process of co-authoring for you on that new book?
On the new book, well, Wes was one of the very first friends I ever made in the publishing world. In fact, when I won my first Stoker Award, he's the one that handed it to me, at the awards. That's where I got to know him, became friends. I've loved his writing for years. So unlike a lot of partnerships where you have a junior writer and a senior writer, and the junior, like they both plotted out, usually the junior writer writes the first draft, the senior writer comes in and does a heavy polish. Like Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child, who do the Pendergast books. Lincoln is less, when they started out, was less experienced than Douglas. So he would go in and write the first draft. And then Douglas would go in and put that heavy polish on it. And that's one of the most common forms. But with Wes and I, we're equals in this. We're both, accomplished storytellers. We both won best first novel in the Stokers, which is fun.
Yeah.
But he was free sooner than I was. So choosing who did the first draft was entirely based on who had a hole in their schedule. And I did not have a hole in my schedule in time. He had just retired from the military. He was in military intelligence for a long time, and really, really good guy. So we had plotted the thing out together based on a pitch I had created originally as a comic book. Real short note here. At one point, IDW Publishing, comic book publisher, was going to do its own shared world horror universe, similar to the Marvel and DCU superhero universes. So it was going to be Steve Niles, Joe Hill, myself, and a few others creating storylines, and that they would all connect in some way. They would all exist in the same world. For some reason, IDW decided not to do that. And it was just a really bad mistake because, Joe, Steve, and I, we would have had a lot of fun building that world.
Absolutely.
And we're all friends, and we're all goofballs and all pop culture nerds. We would have had fun. Anyway, so I took that idea and made it more science fiction, less horror, and brought it to Aethon Publishing, and they said, can you do it? And I said I would need a partner. So I reached out to Wes, and he said, I have a hole in my schedule for about 3 months. So he did the first draft, and he friggin' killed it. I went in and did the second draft, about doubling the amount of words in it. And we just passed it back and forth. It is the most amicable thing I've ever done. We so get each other when it comes to the way we tell stories. And we also know where each other's strengths lie. Building military stuff, building systems, Wes is great for that. Action, character development, and humor are my things. So between the two of us, we had a lot of the bases covered, and we turned out a book we are both in love with. And Ray Porter's recording it right now. He's in love with it. Because Wes has some health issues going on right now, I may have to do the second book alone. But Wes and I already plotted it out, so it would just be me diving in probably around December 1st to start writing that one.
Very cool.
But I've had other situations with collaborators, by the way, that did not work out as well. I won't name names.
I don't expect you to.
I've had really good ones. Like I did a novella with my friend Gregory Frost based on the two elements, the Tam Lin and Thomas the Rhymer folklore from Ireland and so on. And now since I didn't have the time to continue with that, he took the idea, and he now has a series of Thomas the Rhymer books coming out from Baen.
Oh, wow.
So it was a great one. We also had a couple where, I will never work with certain people again because they're prima donnas. And I work in what I call the zero jackass zone.
Yep.
Your ego at the door. Remember, we're making shit up for a living. So how serious should we be taking ourselves? And if it's not fun, we're not doing it right. So
yeah, I agree.
With Wes Oaks, fun every step of the way.
Awesome. Very awesome. Jenny, did you have anything else you wanted to touch on before we
kind of collaborations and such? It was awesome to see Wilson's character show up in this book.
Yes, Repairman Jack, one of my favorite characters. In fact, probably my favorite contemporary weird science thriller. And it's its own zone. I forget when it came out, late 70s, early 80s, somewhere in that zone, long before I thought about writing fiction. And I just loved The Tomb was the book. It was a fantastic book. They made it into a truly awful movie. Scott Glenn. Watchable only because I like the actors, but the movie itself is just not good. But then he went off and wrote a whole gazillion Repairman Jack books. Love the books, and it's the second in two books back to back where I've brought in characters from other writers.
Yep.
Well, the previous one was Hap and Leonard from my buddy Joe Lansdale, who just, by the way, wrote the foreword to a collection of my short horror fiction that'll be out next year.
Oh, cool.
And Joe Lansdale, if anyone hasn't read the Hap and Leonard books, you should, and see the 3 seasons they did on, I think it was USA Network. Fantastic. And there's also, for those mystery fans out there, there is a very covert reference to my favorite literary character of all time, Travis McGee, created by John D. MacDonald. In Relentless, Joe takes the wounded ghost to a friend who is a veterinarian on a boat in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale. That's the daughter of Travis McGee.
Okay, well, those are books I've never heard of. So I'm gonna have to check those out, because those are ones I don't know.
They're right behind me on the 21 books written in the early 60s up until the mid 80s. The character was very progressive in his views about race and women and so on at the time, but that part of it hasn't aged well, because progressive by 1965 standards and progressive by 2023 standards are radically different. But
sure.
He was an intellectual, tough character, and there's a very narrow range of smart, intellectual, tough guys, and I like that range.
I love the idea too of like bringing in characters that, like, I was not familiar with Repairman Jack, but I now have them in my queue, and they're going to be tackled, and it gives that introduction. And I like how when you're talking about Repairman Jack in the book, he's kind of like Ledger if Ledger went a different path. Yeah. And that kind of sums it up. Are there any other characters in books that you would love, that you think would marry well in this series?
Well, there have been a few that have been, there was one walk-on, my buddy Larry Correa. Interesting. He and I could not be more different politically, but I like the guy. He's a good-hearted guy. I like him.
I like his books a lot. Yeah.
Oh, quite a lot. So he wrote a Joe Ledger story. I wrote a Agent Frank story. We did one story one novella where Agent Franks and Ledger worked together, called Weaponized Hell.
What is that? I haven't read that one. What is that in?
Probably in I'm not sure if we put it in one of the short story collections. It may be in Secret Missions. I'm not sure, but it was originally Urban Allies, edited by Jonas Cease, an anthology. Fun story. Definitely dealt with supernatural though, because his character Agent Franks is supernatural.
Yes.
And then Agent Franks has shown up twice in Ledger's stories. Once to save, I think, Rudy Sanchez and his wife, if I'm not mistaken. Dogs of War, maybe. I'm not sure which book.
Oh, maybe. I don't remember. I feel like I would remember Agent Franks.
It was a single scene, but he's been named. Okay. But there were other groups that like Wes Oaks' SEAL Team 666. I will probably be using them in a future Ledger book. Mm-hmm. I would love to be able to use characters from my buddy James Rollins' Sigma Force. I mentioned them because he encouraged me to do that. I mentioned that they're at work doing similar challenges around the world, like all of the teams. What's his name? The chess team series, Jeremy Robinson's chess team series, and a bunch of other series that are all in that weird zone where it's mostly science fiction and action with a smidge of magic or supernatural in them. There's a bunch of us that write in that zone.
I just read Peter Klein's The Broken Room, and all I could think about the entire time was, this kind of feels like a Joe Ledger book a little bit. Well,
Peter Klein makes a cameo in one of the Threshold series, right?
Yeah, and well, first off, Peter Klein's and Scott Sigler are not only friends, they're neighbors.
Okay.
We live here in San Diego, and they're old friends of mine. So in the new Joe Ledger Unbreakable anthology that's coming out, there is a deliberate Threshold Ledger crossover story written by Peter.
Nice.
And there's a Scott Sigler story which crosses over to his world in there too. So we try out some of the collaborations in short fiction, and then we tend to let characters wander into our long fiction at times. But to answer your question, which characters I would like to use that I haven't, other than the ones I've mentioned, some are characters that the publisher would never let me use. John Sanford's Virgil Flowers, who's a private investigator, or is a cop in his series of novels. They would never let me do it because in certain circles of the mystery world and the thriller world, they they have this hatred of supernatural or science fiction in their stories. James Rollins is one of the few that can cross over, because Michael Crichton also crossed over with, at least with the science fiction. Another character I'd like to use would be James Lee Burke's Dave Robichaux character, and that may actually happen. James Lee Burke is my favorite living author. He writes the Dave Robichaux Cajun Mysteries, and his series, even though they are straight mysteries, and he's an Edgar Award winner and Grandmaster, all that, he's put supernatural in at least 3 of his books of that series. John Connolly's Charlie Bird Parker is another one I'd like to do a cameo with. And again, I will probably be able to arrange that. So I'm having fun.
Well, adding into that too, just last week, you had a new Pine Deep short story collection comes out, and I like how there are stories where Ledger kind of shows up and is hanging out with Crow, and I like that when Ledger leaves a story like that, it's weird, and he's used to weird, but not in the same weird as Crow experiences weird. And
when Ledger, I generally have Ledger encounter the supernatural more in short fiction, because long ago I established that my Joe Ledger short stories may or may not be his actual timeline. Like he's appeared in the Rotten Ruin novels. They're not his actual future. They're a spin-off, part of the Maberry multiverse. But in short fiction, I can have Joe Ledger do all sorts of things. And teaming him up with Crow is great. There's a short story coming up in Joe Ledger Unbreakable where he teams up with Monk Addison, who is a mystic private investigator. And they have quite an intense story. And I had a lot of fun writing that.
I was going to say, those two characters don't seem like they would mesh well. Like in a good way. Like
there's a learning curve, for them. But
they both kind of they both walk their own line, and
but both of them walk on one side of a certain line, which is the line where the other side is okay with hurting the innocents. On their side, not so much okay with them. They will do great harm to you if you hurt the innocent, and that's why they're in the game. It's why they stay in the game, because they know what an innocent being hurt is like, because they've been hurt and they've seen hurt firsthand. Some people, post-traumatic stress disorder affects people in different ways. Some people, it drives off the battlefield forever. Some people, it keeps them from ever leaving it. And there's a lot of iterations in between. And, Joe has wrestled with whether he is in the game because of hubris or whether he is in the game because he really is able to still make a difference. And it's fun to explore that, because, Junie's called him on it. So is Rudy.
Yes.
Well, and that's what's so great with pairing him up with somebody like Monk, because just his development through the Ink book there's so much growth there, but a lot of similarities, just completely different outcomes when decisions need to be made. Yeah. But then they do kind of all converge back. It's an interesting pairing.
It's fun. And with Monk, I have 2 private investigators who are supernaturals. One is a werewolf, Sam Hunter. One is a mystic, which is and kind of half-assed necromancer in a way, because he deals with the dead. He works for the dead, but they're completely different from one another. I haven't yet put them in the same story, because Sam's character is much funnier than Monk. Sam is closer to Weird Al Yankovic, and Monk is closer to Tom Waits in terms of theme. So. Oh, who knows? That'll probably happen. And it'll probably happen in Pine Deep.
Of course. That's the best place to have it. Yeah. Well, I'm just kind of looking over our notes here, and boy, Jenny, I think we hit everything on here that kind of we were going to be talking about. So just maybe it's time, Jonathan, to once again tell everybody the name of the book, where they can buy the book, the release date of the book, all the plugging stuff, if Jenny doesn't have anything else.
Well, also, the second or the last quarter of this year, I'll be doing last third of this year, I'll be doing some public appearances. I haven't done any since earlier this year, well, except for Comic-Con. But I'll be doing a signing at Mysterious Galaxy Bookstore on the 30th for Cave 13, which comes out on Tuesday. and Long Past Midnight, the Pine Deep book, which came out last week. I'll be signing both of those books and any other books that people order at Mysterious Galaxy. And it's on my website, and I'll be posting links again. And then on the 2nd of September, I'll be at Artifact Books in San Diego, in Encinitas, again with those 2 books, and also with the Kagan books.
Nice.
I'll be doing a Barnes and Noble on the 5th of September for the release of Sleeper's War Alpha Wave, first book in that series, and it's going to be, that is built, even though we've sold 3, it's built as an ongoing series. We have no intention to end it. And Dark Delicacies in Burbank on the 9th of September. And then I start doing conference appearances. I'll be at Archon, which is in Illinois, at the end of October, Toastmaster there. I'll be doing 20 books to 50K, which is interesting, which is it's a writers' conference. It's mostly for independent books, independent writers, which I'm not. I teach craft there, but we are launching the Joe Ledger anthology, Joe Ledger Unbreakable there. And a lot of the people, Kevin J. Anderson, Marie Whitaker, Kevin Eikenberry, Brian Thomas Schmidt, they'll all be there for that launch. And for the Burbank signing, one of the writers from that anthology, Wayne Brady, is probably going to be there. And yes, that's Wayne Brady. He co-wrote a Top story.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, he's the coolest guy. We've become buds. It's fun. And then I'll be doing PhilCon in Vegas Book Festival in October. Then PhilCon, Philadelphia Science Fiction Convention, middle of November. So I'll be out there signing books, meeting folks, having some fun. I won't be at Dragon Con this year, which is a bummer. But it's either that or finish the new Kagan book, and my editor will have me shot if I don't get that Kagan book to him. So,
yeah, you got to get that. Got to get all those words in.
I do. I jump right on novel number 50, which is Joe Ledger.
You always mention Mysterious Galaxy, and the last time I was in San Diego was because my brother lives there. It was a world. Actually, I wasn't even in San Diego. We were actually in Palm Springs because my brother was getting married, and it was a whirlwind trip, and I didn't get to go to Mysterious Galaxy. So the next time I go visit him, actually in San Diego proper, I got to get to Mysterious Galaxy.
Beautiful big bookstore. They've moved a couple of times in the 10 years I've lived in San Diego, and one of the reasons I love indie bookstores so much is you can go into any chain bookstore, and they can tell you what shelf a book is on. Go in an indie bookstore, they can tell you about the book. They can tell you about the writer. They can talk books with you. And that matters so much. And they're just the coolest group of folks. And it's my local store, and it's where anybody who ever wants anything of mine signed, they just contact the store, order the book, and then the bookstore lets me know when to come in and sign books, which about once or twice a month I go in and sign a whole bunch of books, and that's fun too.
Very cool.
I'm excited for the Dark Delicacy. That's like right around the corner from me, and I go in there and I chat with them all the time. And yeah, you're definitely a big name in that one. And it was nice to find out that he wrote a story in one of your collections, which was really cool.
Yeah. Del Howson's a great guy, and unfortunately, Del and Susan are closing Dark Delicacies next year. So this is the last. Well, it's probably about 9 or 10 months left before they close it. They want to retire, and it's a shame too, because it's a landmark bookstore.
Yeah. Oh, and they just got through the whole thing with the whole Magnolia restructure, so they're over there on Hollywood Way now. That sucks.
Yeah, but they've been doing it a long time, and they want to retire. And I think Del wants to just focus on writing. He's gotten the bug, and he's a good writer. So, but it'll be a heartbreak for me because I love that store. It's actually it's because of a signing at that store where Ray Porter had joined me. Scott Sigler and Peter Kleins had come, and they met Ray Porter there, and that's why he's now recording their books.
That's rad.
Very cool.
No, I think that's where I met Ray last year when you were doing the Relentless signing.
Yeah.
It's a great spot. But definitely support the local bookstops, because that's where you get like the book clubs. That's where you get the recommendations that you don't necessarily get if you're doing a big chain store or ordering online.
And Ray may be there at the signing as well as Wayne. I just hope they both can make it. It's a little difficult for them during the strike. Now, luckily, the stuff they do that is book related and audiobook related has nothing to do with the SAGs and WGA strike, of which we are all supporters.
Right.
So hopefully they will be able to come because they're both fairly local to it, and should be a party.
Cool. Thanks so much again for joining us here once again to talk about, all these things we love in your books and everything. It's always such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. And Cave 13, I'm glad you guys enjoyed the book. I had a criminal amount of fun writing this one. Even though
Real quick, a question I forgot to ask is Tombs coming back, because that was a fun, like, added bad guy. I liked him.
I like Tombs a lot. I have a couple different opinions of what I might want to do with him. I might actually move him over to another series, and that's something I can talk about later on, because we are in discussions about a possibly parallel series to the Joe Ledger books.
Very good.
You can probably guess what that might be.
I can, but we don't want you to talk about things you can't talk about yet.
Yeah,
Obviously.
it's not.
Well, we do, but
it's not under contract yet. But a lot. Let's just say the publisher is going to be paying attention a lot to the way in which a certain new group of heroes is received by the audience.
All right, everybody, buy and read Cave 13. If you made it through this whole thing and somehow decided you wanted to know a lot about it before you read it. Otherwise, we all hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, there were definitely spoilers in this. So
Yes. Yep.
yeah.
thanks, guys. It's always a pleasure to chat with you guys. And
Thank you.
I'm a big fan of Atomic Geekdom. So thanks for having me on, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you so much. This was a blast. Until next time.
Until next time.
Till
Bye.
next time.